If you have a history of seizures or epilepsy, please refrain from looking at or standing near the hydromagnetic cube stability units. If you do not have a history of seizures or epilepsy, then you are in for a treat.
Welcome.
So, Portal. Good old Portal. To be a little more particular with my words, Portal 1. I've been aware of the Portal series since birth. The first game is essentially just as old as I am, and I've known it through and through from the moment I developed the ability to remember things. So why would someone like me, and I assume plenty of the people watching this, keep coming back? Well, the answer's quite obvious. Valve's created an environment, and if you include the Half-Life side of things, an interconnected world, that's quite difficult to just pull away from. Endlessly fascinating. But why replay the games themselves instead of just, indulging merely in the informational side of things? Surely by replay 1096, it's grown stale? I'd say the answer there is way more dependent on the individual, but from my point of view, Valve, and particularly the DigiPen students behind the concept in the first place, have successfully created this complete mechanical picture that feels not just satisfying to figure out, but also equally just as fun to execute. Still, despite all that, I'm sure the thought crossed your mind once or twice. Oh, I wish I could forget all of this and re-experience it again. Of course, unless you're capable of manipulating your memory like files on a hard drive, that's completely impossible. That's the reason this game spawned such a sprawling modding scene in the first place. We've got the usual Mel, Revolution, the sequel-based stuff that's been covered plenty, but I've been hoping to spotlight a pair of mods based on the first Portal that have yet to receive a similarly thorough appraisal. They've gone with so little coverage, in fact, that I'd wager that some of you aren't even aware of them in the first place. I am, naturally, talking about Portal Pro and its direct sequel, Rexaura. Two mods developed by Mevius that offer up new campaigns, both equal to Portal 1 in length, arguably a bit longer even, with fresh new puzzle designs that play on pre-established mechanics in interesting ways, while also offering up a charming spin on the usual Portal plot. One that imbues it with a sort of emergent meta-commentary on the way time has affected this series. Now we can't loiter long, so get those jumpsuits out, nail some knee replacements into your bones, and prepare yourself for another lap around the Enrichment Center. And another. And another.
And another. And another.
Alright, so starting us off is Portal Pro, a July 2010 release that promises to give us puzzles with solutions that are hard to come up with, but easy to actually do, something this pair of mods handles quite wonderfully, by the way. While the sequel ends up getting a Steam release, this one's exclusively a ModDB download, the link to which I have dropped down in the description. If you want to play it completely safe, I'd actually advise taking the 4 or so hours out of your day to give these two a playthrough before coming back here. But to keep things interesting and not starve you of solving these yourself, I figured the best way to go through this test run is to review the complete picture presented without delving into the finer details. Just give me a second to set this up. Aha! Yup, there we go. We begin our test run with a premature awakening to a sequence awfully reminiscent of Half-Life's starting train ride, catching a tantalizing glimpse at the facility's guts as we are transported to our intended environment. We're introduced to our overseer with a clinical, professional-sounding preamble.
Hello and welcome to the Aperture Science Testing Facility. We hope you have enjoyed your period of induced unconsciousness. Today you will undergo a series of tests to evaluate your mind, your body, and your ability to survive high rates of deceleration. Please be patient while you are transported to the first test chamber.
GLaDOS is back, with a convincing enough TTS imitation of her voice, albeit one with a prominent British accent, and she seems to be engaging in her usual facade. As we arrive, Portal Pro's visual style is immediately on full display with a gnarly-looking white void. It must undoubtedly be mentioned that Mevius has replicated and iterated on Portal 1's visual design masterfully. Any additions and flourishes that you won't find in retail nonetheless feel like something 2007 Valve could have come up with. Not unexpected, as the developer behind the mod is someone who's pretty extensively involved in the Portal mapping scene, having created maps hosted on a separate website prior to its release. Though, unfortunately, I've only managed to unearth recordings of a handful, such as Resurrection. The end result follows Portal's design playbook perfectly. Simple, stylish, practical. With a hopelessly British introduction,
What's all this then?
we are familiarized with the mechanics of portals, and quickly given the downgraded version of the portal device. What you step into next is a set of 25 chambers exploring a variety of mechanics to different extents, some highlighted tremendously, while others play a more minor role. Although the mod certainly anticipates your familiarity with the source material, it doesn't shy away from basic tutorialization, which may explain the unusual chamber count. It takes a bit to take off, but difficulty nonetheless begins to ramp up sooner than retail, even before you get your hands on the dual portal device. Something I very much enjoy is that for a mod this old, it's quite fresh to see a test run that doesn't shy away from playing around with monoportal puzzles. The lesser half of the track is spent with limited control of the second portal, and the chamber designs prove excellently that this limitation has its applications beyond familiarizing you with portals as a mechanic. It also serves to uniquely complicate the logistics of both chamber traversal and other testing elements like cubes and energy pellets. You are also introduced to two mechanics, one completely new, while the other had a comparatively subdued role in the main game. The first is the Aperture Science Mortality Sensitive Sensor, a mechanic that has been commonly implemented in other mods such as Factum Solus. However, considering Portal Pro's age, this may be one of the earlier, if not the first, implementation of such a concept. Either way, it's used extensively and cleverly, making it feel right at home among the official testing elements. The second is the Rocket Turret, a sorely underutilized turret variant, at least in serious context, that has been thoroughly implemented throughout this test run, testing your understanding of portal positioning and essentially acting as a sort of key for the metaphorical door known as solid glass. The first half of the test continues under this guise of professionalism, while your understanding of the new elements is thoroughly reinforced. However, cracks in the picture start to form far earlier, presented in the form of uncleaned messes seen around the testing environment. Severed limbs laying before a solid metal wall. A partially melted corpse floating in a viscous pool of corrosives. Uncleaned filth which GLaDOS attempts to write off as the consequence of scheduling errors.
Unfortunately, our cleaning crew hasn't sorted out last week's incident.
Nonetheless, it's increasingly clear that there's something wrong with this place, and admittedly, the mod very much expects you to be well aware of Aperture's dangers, playing around with its unethically wacky nature.
Looking for the perfect gift? The Aperture Science gift shop now specializes in muscle and tissue upgrades. Aperture Science, do not ask what science can do for you, ask what you can do for science.
As you approach the end of your time with the monoportal device, the mod begins to toy around with a familiar aspect of the first game, momentum. However, with a twist the first game never touches upon. As opposed to mere momentum conservation, you often find yourself dealing with a surplus, overflinging beyond your intended destination. The goal becomes not how far you can fling yourself, but how to acquire just the right amount of acceleration to get where you need to go without overshooting. As said by our wonderful, totally indifferent supervisor, we're dealing with
high rates of deceleration. By creating an orange portal, you agree to the terms and conditions outlined in Section 11285384912337 of the Aperture Science Employee Contract.
Finally, we arrive at the site of the upgraded portal gun, and I would like to mention just how much I enjoy the spin on its acquisition. Instead of a reliance on the gun's automated rotation, you find yourself in limited control of the second portal's position via the various pedestal buttons found scattered around the chamber. You are already being conditioned to think about the second portal's position, which will be very important to consider in the tests ahead. This is the point where the mod's difficulty begins steadily ramping up, along with another concerning development. GLaDOS has begun to engage in some rather out-of-pocket antagonizing, as if her patience is already starting to thin with you.
Did you even read that section? I bet you did not read that section, otherwise you would not have created an orange portal.
Her professionalism deteriorates near instantaneously, dropping the facade out of immediate disinterest instead of the panic experienced by her canon counterpart.
You seem to be good at this already, which, unfortunately, is not very entertaining to me. You should have seen the last guy to make it this far. Now that was funny. This is boring. I'm going to let my processes focus on something more important than you for a while. I'll be back when you get to the difficult test chambers.
The chamber complexity noticeably increases after this point. Most notably, emancipation grills begin to take a more active role in the chambers themselves. You're also incentivized to be a lot more attentive to the specific placements of surfaces in a chamber. And there are a couple of cases where the only reason you may get stuck is because the obvious solution feels a little obscured underneath a number of elements whose visual interplay might be a little intimidating. In other words, certain chambers have a tendency to make you overthink. Rest assured, the mod never strays from its original design goal. Solution executions pose no challenge, only their discovery does. Mevius has set out to challenge your brain, not the tendons and ligaments of your fingers. Still, chambers certainly increase in both size and complexity, and the interactions between the mechanics, both old and new, grow more intricate. Sensors and grills, rockets and surplus, filthy windows, flames of hell, and energy pellets. Another thing I believe deserves ample praise is the mod's masterful utilization of setup and payoff. With one minor exception, everything introduced gets taken to its logical conclusion, with many of the things you're taught coming into play in the mod's culmination.
Oops, that was not supposed to happen. I have an idea.
Of course, testing never lasts forever, and after a pair of chambers I can confidently call exams on all of the introduced mechanics, we're going to have to say goodbye.
This is it, the end of the test. We've had fun, haven't we?
Now, it's necessary for every good testing track to have a convenient method of exit, and while this one isn't very fast, the element of subject participation is respectable. I'd say your best bet is to jump head first with your eyes, mouth, and nostrils open up as much as possible, so the fluid can get to dissolving its way towards your brain a bit quicker than the rest of your body. Maybe try snorting some of it as you drown and see if it speeds things along a bit. Ideally, the pain would only last for a few seconds before your brain becomes too mushy to process any of it.
Points for the ethical element, but arguably nowhere near as reliable as a simple controlled shot. Unfortunately, this unit has run into a problem and requires a restart. No further action is required on your behalf. Stand by.
Hey, I'm gonna be filling in for Flatface. Here's the rundown. After discovering our secret alternative Swiss suicide option and using it to blow a hole into the observation room, the subject slipped out into the organ collection annex and from there went on a self-guided tour across the Trax's backstage infrastructure. Ingeniously, and kind of hilariously to be honest, the rat's been using the very tricks taught to them by the track. Flinging around the pistons, blowing up windows. You know, honestly, I kind of envy the amount of fun they seem to have had. They even managed to circumvent our turrets, which is kind of odd to me, because the blueprints tell me that they don't use a single one of those on the track, so they shouldn't even be familiar with what they do. Anyway, the Central Core tried putting a stop to the situation by corralling the subject into a face-to-face confrontation, but it seems they managed to circumvent her, despite all the fancy boss fight tactics. That's pretty much all we know. I mean, you can't exactly figure out the details without putting yourself in their shoes. You know, this would make for a pretty fun mod if this were in real life. I'd definitely give something like that a play. Anyway, I think I've humored you lot enough. I mean, I still have actual work to do. So, yeah, I'm out of here. See ya.
Whoa.
Well, I'm back. Pardon the interruption, there's been a bit of a power fluctuation, but we should be able to continue on with our intended program. So, to summarize, Mevius had delivered a really well thought out, expertly executed spin on Portal's gameplay, exploring mechanical intricacies Valve hadn't touched even in the sequel. New elements are introduced thoughtfully and sparingly, and a sorely underutilized turret type got to spend some time in the spotlight. What's not to like? As a cherry on top, the mod has a thrilling soundtrack that skillfully matches the foreboding, isolating atmosphere Kelly Bailey had crafted. You've been listening to it the whole time, by the way. And a very well written, albeit curiously altered take on the character of GLaDOS. A pretty nice way to spend $0 and a couple of hours of your time. So anyways, if Portal Pro is so good, why isn't there a Portal hacker? Well, looks like someone's a glutton for enrichment. Welcome back to the testing facility. 4 years after the conclusion of the initial test run, a December 2014 release sees the same subject recycled for use in an alternative emergency track focused entirely on the manipulation of energy pellets. To reiterate a prior point, considering this is a far more accessible mod compared to its predecessor, I would advise giving it a download and playing it for yourself. Trust me, you'll find the experience so much more rewarding, and it's not like I'll be going anywhere. This desk isn't exactly lightweight, you see. But yeah, anyway, word of advice, up to you, really. Please note, nowadays, this mod seems to trigger a false positive with Windows Defender, but from what I can tell, it's perfectly fine. It's the exact same thing that was happening with Black Mesa for a bit, but with Rexaura going unsupported for probably a decade by now, this little hiccup is likely here to stay. I've had this mod sitting on my hard drive for years, and it's doing just fine. Now, having discussed testing, track, designation, here, let's shift our attention to the starkly contrasting, uniquely difficult testing, track, designation, here. Pardon the change in scenery, but I've heard this place has a more reliable power grid for our purposes. I can work with this if you'll just give me a second. We begin our test run ripped from ourselves, beholden to an opening cutscene that is rather interesting when placed beside its equivalent in Portal Pro. Instead of a glimpse into the facility's guts, we find them obscured behind rows upon rows of pillars. By all means, the subject isn't even the one seeing all of this. Our body is sound asleep inside of that relaxation vault. Quite the evocative imagery. As the panel slams into proper alignment, we come out of our re-induced unconsciousness to an unfamiliar voice on the announcement system.
Good morning and welcome to session 999 of your Aperture Science Enrichment Center Automated Testing Confinement.
That rather impartial voice you heard is the lovely Encouragement Core, one of GLaDOS's components. Rest assured, it has not taken over the facility's vital functions. The main testing administrator is still alive and, despite whatever prior disagreements or altercations you may have had, remains eager to oversee your progress on this new round of testing.
There's no need to worry. Testing will resume.
I do have to say, this is probably the best possible way of introducing a secondary voice on the intercom. The Encouragement Core doesn't compete with GLaDOS over player attention, being relegated to a more secondary role and acting as someone her dialogue can bounce off of. I think their interactions are pretty entertaining. A good way of making dialogue more engaging, as this mod is otherwise heavily puzzle-centric with no notable intermissions in between. Solving a test to hear one-sided bickering GLaDOS engages in is great, with her often acting as the ill-tempered foil to the core's automated absurdity.
Uncaught file not found exception. Congratulatory speech file number 037 does not exist. Please instruct the test subject to congratulate itself, and then proceed to the chamber exit.
You've got to be kidding me.
Chamber 0 wastes no time getting the monoportal device into your hands, now working off of a presumption with 7 years backing it up. You get it already. You know how this thing works. And to be fair, after 7 years, it's a little difficult not to be. The second half of the chamber dedicates itself to the reintroduction of a mechanic the mod has chosen to act as its core, the energy pellet. A simple mechanic on paper, get a ricocheting projectile from point A to point B. So simple, in fact, that you'd think this is quite the constricting limitation to put on your work. Rest assured, that is far from the case. Mevius has designed a suite of testing elements along with minor tweaks to the base game's mechanics that allow Rexaura's 19 chambers to exploit this core concept to the fullest imaginable potential. The first 3 of these elements are introduced in rapid succession before proceeding to a sort of exam chamber where they are all utilized at the same time. Every element was fine-tuned to synergize with the others, creating an intricate design that reaches mechanical climax at the difficult test chambers. The first to be introduced among them is the Hydromagnetic Cube Stability Unit. You can think of it as a sort of high-tech frame, one that works in tandem with the cube in order to redirect a pellet by a precise 90 degrees, something a little too difficult to consistently perform bare-handed. To complicate the relationship between cube and pellet, the mod has introduced a new, albeit quite logical interaction. Not unlike its reaction to flesh, the energy discharge of the pellet will cause irreparable damage to a cube's composition. That is, complete vaporization. You'll find that the 2 of these alone can already make for some unthinkable setups, but the mod's only begun to expand the element roster. A very glaring flaw in the energy pellet's behavior is that its failure state permits it to ricochet around the chamber for a brief period of time, sometimes resulting in accidental and therefore unsatisfying solutions to a puzzle. The positron energy orb acts as a direct obstacle, annihilating the pellet upon immediate contact. This allows it to act as a sort of guardrail that punishes improper alignment, further incentivizing the use of the Hydromagnetic Cube Stability Unit and very effectively minimizing the possibility of achieving a solution directly through error. In layman's terms, this thing kills pellets. A very bad orb. Its other functions include inducing
Brain hemorrhages, retinal boiling, internal microwave syndrome, minor lung explosions, and eventually death.
which is very thoroughly demonstrated by a nearby... what did she call these?
Incident.
Closing out this introductory triumvirate is the thoroughly re-implemented super, or green, high-energy pellet. You might recognize it for its fleeting appearance in the retail games Chamber 19, where it's been relegated to the role of a rather inconvenient obstacle. Here, Mevius has given it a far more meaningful role in the test ecosystem. What sets it apart from its less stable counterpart is that it can last for an indefinite period of time, provided that its emitter is reliably powered, that is, the press of a pedestal button or the continued application of pressure on a super button. This longevity, paired with the ability to control the pellet's lifespan through direct interaction, results in setups that are pretty exclusive to this variant, ensuring that it cannot be written off as a more beginner-friendly version of its more impermanent cousin. These elements combine for the first time to create a puzzle of a
third grade level.
While this self-description is used mostly for comedic effect, I also believe it to be a sort of promise on the mod's part. What you've seen so far is child's play. In the meantime, either to incentivize you or simply because this is the most interesting thing going for her, GLaDOS decides to start drip-feeding you information behind the purpose of this little exercise.
This isn't a completely normal test run.
I'd like to keep this little surprise of hers under wraps for those unaware. Not the kind of twist I've seen in a Portal mod very often. To put it vaguely, the work you're doing is important to at least one, arguably alive entity in the facility. But I digress. Next up, we are introduced to the Aperture Science Radiative Flux Rectangle. You can think of it as a sensor, calibrated for the radiative flux of energy pellets instead of the mortality of your own body. Fascinatingly, this simple alteration to their behavior greatly complicates a test setup as opposed to the usual sensor. Your own positioning plays a role just as vital as the pellets, and as a result, a common problem seen in a chamber is figuring out the logistics of getting both yourself and the pellet from point A to point B. Nevertheless, the mod never devolves into heavy reliance on timing and reaction speed. The core principle of Portal Pro's design is very much carried over and maintained here.
If you experience a mild tingling sensation while passing through the radiative flux rectangle, it's probably just your imagination. Or possibly the radiation.
On the approach to the dual portal device, I would like to mention that it is quite nice to see that neither of these two mods shy away from exploring monoportal chamber design. It bears repeating here as well. It doesn't feel like a tutorial technique at all. With the lesser half of the test run spent in control of one portal, a respectable chunk of the puzzle designs proudly display the ways in which such a limitation can enhance the testing experience rather than hampering it.
It took you long enough to get here. And don't use the "I'm more familiar with two portals" excuse. Utter nonsense.
With your gun upgraded to full operational capacity, the testing track starts steadily ratcheting up the difficulty. In the meantime, our supervisors are busy ratcheting up intrigue.
Mysterious surprise at 99.9995% activation energy.
After reacquainting you with controlling both portals, the mod introduces one last mechanic into the mix, a temporary pellet catcher. Pellets fed into this variant will eventually blow, adding a bit of a timed element that is often utilized in tandem with several pellets at once. With this final addition, the roster of Rexaura's custom testing element has been fully introduced. Everything that needs to be taught has been relayed to you, and now it's up to you to figure out the way they may slot together in any particular configuration. They do quite a bit with all of this. There's really never a dull moment in this test run. Intricacies of portal placement, a welcome bit of momentum, some synchronicity is involved. There's even one particular favorite test of mine which involves...
While many of the testing elements have the ability to copulate with humans, only a select few will actually produce offspring.
Pellet, justifying the addition of that interaction beyond re-incentivizing the use of the stability units. Really, the sheer cleverness behind the mod's design is astounding to me. Mevius has expertly matched the level of clarity and cohesion of Valve's staff. You can tell these maps have undergone some rigorous iteration and playtesting. Still, as the chamber count ticks up, so does the charge of whatever surprise GLaDOS has in store for us. And despite rather mediocre expectations in regards to your performance, you will eventually find yourself walking towards the final exit elevator, undoubtedly eager to see what you've been working towards.
You're probably wondering for what all that energy is going to be used. Well, I'm not going to tell you, and I'll bet the anticipation is killing you.
Now, as for this track's method of exit, error, file, recursion, Rexaura, segment, 3 dots, MP SCP-3 has been renamed, moved, removed, or corrupted.
So, I guess that's it then. Thanks for testing. Quite the pair of courses, no? Very respectable body of work. Almost a shame to be done with it so quickly, right? Well, I lied to you earlier. We haven't exactly covered the complete picture of what these two mods have to offer. Both works have a respectably sized folder of bonus maps to work through, though unlocking them will require some unique ideas and creativity on your part. Acquiring all of them is a fun little scavenger hunt all on its own. Nevertheless, their method of discovery might be a little uncouth to perform in a supervised environment.
Are you really going to eat that? It's been sitting on the floor for who knows how long. Not to mention you almost stepped on it.
Now with all of that out of the way, I would like to do one last brief pause before we get into the narrative cherries atop this rich batter of plasma and chemicals. I would hope that I've sufficiently incentivized the last of those who haven't played this to give it a go. I will not hold off on spoilers past this point, as the section up ahead requires more in-depth knowledge of the interconnected events going on between these two. Let's give it, say, half a minute or so of silent contemplation while I get this next segment ready. Should be plenty of time to pause and give these two gems a play. Let the silence descend. Absolute silence. Starting now. Alright, I think that's plenty. Let's go! Why is it that we replay the Portal series time and time again? Why come back when you know the exact solutions, when you know the order of chambers by heart? The solution euphoria is long gone. What's interesting to me is that by subtly altering her personality, the SWAT series turns GLaDOS into the perfect mouthpiece for this sort of frustration. I mean, we all know how it goes. The mod doesn't even try to hide it. She's murdered everyone in the building, judging by the mess she's made, potentially in a manner far more unrestrained and violent compared to mere gassing. This is a GLaDOS that's gone unregulated since the beginning, and it seems she's dealt with her creators before they could even consider putting a leash on her. Since the first installment predates Portal 2, it's likely that this iteration of her isn't even driven by solution euphoria. It probably isn't even a response wired into her systems. Her investment lies in watching the increasingly stupid ways that test subjects can get themselves killed. She doesn't even bother cleaning the previous attempts out, either out of disinterest or because she prefers the chambers looking this way. After all, she very directly mentions the chambers having
Body retrieval systems.
So, for example, this corpse might have been left here just because she thinks it's funny. By the way, what I think happened here is that she deliberately opened up a wall and then slammed it shut right as a subject was lunging for the exit. This version of her is very much willing to risk a breach if she thinks it'll make for a good comedic setup.
You should have seen the last guy to make it this far. Now that was funny.
I think the reason she's gotten like this is clear enough. She's seen enough people solve these properly, seen enough people follow through with the mandatory suicide at the end of the test. It's gotten cliché, it's gotten boring. At the end of the day, there's only so many variations when it comes to solving a puzzle correctly. Getting yourself killed just has so much more variety by comparison. She's probably seen everything this testing track has to offer about 100 subjects ago, so she's trying to squeeze the last possible bits of variety out of it. The unfinished chamber gives me the impression she can't build new puzzles herself as easily as her official counterpart, so she's forced to make do with what the facility already has. When she says,
I could have killed you long ago, but I was having too much fun playing with you,
I don't doubt that she means it. It's as easy as lifting a finger for her. She could squash you with the walls, could fling you off a ledge using the very floor you walk on, could trap you with a rocket turret and watch you run laps until you eventually starve yourself to exhaustion and get blown apart. Hell, it's possible she's only not doing that because she's done it all already, but she's never let someone get all the way to her chamber, never got to murder someone up close. Now that would be funny. Now that would be fresh. I'm not even certain getting herself killed is anything beyond an inconvenience for her. She certainly doesn't sound as vengeful about it as her Portal 2 counterpart. Even as you turn her weapons against her, she simply sends you running, and as you think you got away, it turns out you've just thrown yourself into another snare of hers. The blast means about as much to her as you making a mess. She even describes it as
You're a massive failure.
You didn't wound her, you just broke something that didn't even mean that much to her. The worst thing you might have done to her is getting her stuck with the encouragement core. Even then, technically, your actions were simply a much needed change of pace. Now she has a completely new set of tests. It's not much, it's definitely no spectacle, but since the bar is so low, this is still the best entertainment she's had in a while. This is essentially a take on Portal's story where GLaDOS wins. Her situation in Rexaura is one that can be described as 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sure, a major section of the facility is now a smoldering chunk, but it was essentially already useless to her long before it even blew up. Through whatever method, either a reconstruction akin to the one seen in Portal 2, or a transfer to an alternative body, she survived with what is at worst a minor nuisance clinging to her chassis. The encouragement core is an annoyance, but at least it isn't directly messing with her head like a tumor. Observing the new testing sequence isn't exactly thrilling, but she's still complaining noticeably less than before, and even chooses to relive this experience again and again. She's found a solution to her frustration, one that only a machine like her is capable of doing. Once she sees it through to the end, she just sends you back to the start while wiping her own memory.
That way you will get to keep testing, and for me the illusion of scientific progress will continue.
She's doing what her Portal 2 incarnation didn't have the heart to go through with. You're being used up, and she'll likely keep this loop up until you grow too frail to abuse. I'm sure even in that case, she'll just fish someone else out of the relaxation vaults and enjoy another 60 years or so of recycled distraction. She'll never grow as a person in the same way that her official counterpart does, but arguably neither of them even wanted that in the first place. She's way better off like this. Her Portal 2 counterpart grows increasingly desperate after she lets Chell go. I'm sure she would envy this version of herself, spending eternity in a state of slight amusement compared to her increasingly insatiable urge for a test subject that lasts the way Chell would have. She's achieved something I'm sure a decent few of us have only wished for. She's made testing evergreen. You don't need to come up with new courses if you can just wipe away your memories of a single one and loop your way through it forever. It beats getting on with things, doesn't it? It beats dealing with even a second's boredom, a second's deprivation, a second's wondering of, what do I do with myself now? This is far more preferable. An eternity of sighing in vague interest at someone else's expense. An eternity of not quite boredom. An eternity's recursion. All this to say, I think if this version of GLaDOS had access to the perpetual testing initiative, she'd be the type to complain in the comments of 10-year-olds using the built-in test designer about how this 14-year-old game's workshop scene isn't what it used to be. Well, I suppose that's that. I always found that these two particular mods sorely lacked a video spotlighting them compared to ones like Portal Stories Mel or Revolution, and if this convinces even one person to give this duology a shot, then I'm more than satisfied. Good talk, good talk. Anyway, I kind of need to pack and go. I'm not registered here as a... What was that? Oh shit!